Welcome back. So it's another field manager spotlight. This time we have a surprise. Jacob's not here. So the surprise is that we're going to invite you to share your thoughts, either tailoring your approach to providing feedback or kind of lessons learned from your management experience.
So I'll give a more recent, since I've joined GitLab, it's an aha moment that I've had that I really appreciate. Something that we do in commercial is something called a chronological interview. And there's a section of the interview, well, the main portion of the interview is we ask them about each position they've had. What was your biggest accomplishment? What was your biggest challenge? Why did you choose to leave the role? We ask them a number of questions over and over and over again for each job that they've had. And there's one section in particular where we say, okay, if we were to call your manager and interview them and ask them what's your greatest strength and what's the thing they would want to coach you on, what would they say? And then the second part B of that question is, what was your manager's greatest strength? And what could your manager have done to coach you better? And Tim does these, he's clapping over there because he does these interviews too. One of the things that I love about him, especially if they've had 3 to 6 previous positions, is you see the exact same pattern show up as answers to this question, where the greatest strength is I'm super organized. The greatest weakness is I'm not very proactive in how I deal with stuff. Manager's greatest strength, they always had my back. Manager's greatest weakness, they were not direct with me when I needed to hear bad news. So what's really cool about that is I think it gives me a very, very early warning on how this person wants to be communicated with. And even if the thing that I need to do is outside of my comfort zone or my typical style, it validates the fact that I need to do it, because I know that if I was one of those managers on that question list that person's going to be getting interviewed in the future about, I don't want to be the person that they say, well, that person wasn't direct with me, or they weren't, whatever that thing might be. So that is something that Ryan Ornell's been put into place. And I'm really thankful for it, because it kind of gives me a look, at all the cheat codes that's going to make this person tick. And it just makes it a lot easier to have those conversations, knowing that they're craving that direct feedback or whatever that thing might be.
Awesome.
Wait, Nick, when do you use that for external candidates, or do you use that
internal, external? It's kind of step 3 right before they come in and do a mock sales call, or they present as a manager about how they'd run their team.
I wonder if a similar thing could be applied org-wide with how recruiting kind of structures interviews. That's a really cool process. Yeah, I haven't heard that before.
Recruiting uses it today. It's a 50 minute interview that we do for all commercial client-facing roles.
Very cool.
I think even if it's not for other parts of GitLab, if it's not integrated into the interview process, even part of the onboarding, I think that would give a lot of good insights to the manager to know, just have that background, right, of your new person that comes on board, what makes them tick. I like that.
And Nick, you said it better than I will, but the other aha moment of a chronological is after you've spoken with somebody about those managers that they've had, you can tell that it's pretty quick in their mind that, that person was my manager, but they really didn't help me. They were too friendly. They were too this, they were too subtle. And I really she was a tough boss, but man, did she make me see that I wasn't quite as great as I thought I was. It's like, oh, okay. That's validation that we have that responsibility to deliver feedback, even when it is hard or even when it feels uncomfortable, because those are the bosses we walk back to and say, you were tough, but you grew, or I grew under your leadership. I love that. So I think your framed question with Mr. Jacob Potter from the Level Up screen really was about customizing feedback. I'd love to hear some stories about people who can't coach everybody the same way on the same team.
Much like what you just said, I have a lot of respect for my managers that can give me strong feedback. And 26 years of tech experience, I'd say there's probably 3 managers that I felt like I really learned under, because they gave me feedback, right? They weren't just like, well, you know what to do, just do more of that and more, that's just, so I tend to manage that way, and not everybody likes that, right? So I've definitely had to figure out with my team. I have a couple on my team that have admittedly, and it's interesting to hear somebody tell me, I have a bit of when you are basically afraid that you're going to get caught out and found out and fired because you're a fraud. It's called
Imposter syndrome.
that. I had 2 people on my team tell me, oh, okay, why are you calling me in at like 4 o'clock on a Friday? Like, what did I do? Am I getting fired? Total imposter syndrome. I'm like, oh my God, calm down. I've got good news for you. That's why I'm calling you at the end of the day on a Friday. And it's interesting because knowing those that have that, I have to really tailor my conversations. And I now know to put in the thread, do you have a minute for some good news? Right? Because they panic. So I guess I have a bit more of a tough love approach, and I've had to really dial it back.
One thing for me is when I ask, for that time to give direct feedback, is I always tell them which project it's about. And I'll even preface by saying, for some feedback on this project. And I try to normalize feedback so that they're used to these things. It's not unexpected. It's not like they've been working for a whole quarter or 6 months without, one of these meetings happening. So that they know how it's going to go and what to expect. And I never, ever schedule a meeting without giving them a heads up what the subject is.
Yeah, fair point.
Something Reshmi said earlier that stood out to me is write it down ahead of time, and then use specific, I don't think she specifically mentioned this, but using specific examples. I think it's, to Patrick's point, instead of it being about the person and attacking the person, it's focusing on a specific event, on how to improve that specific event. And you've obviously given it a lot of thought at that point, when you can obviously show that it's been written down and you've thought through it instead of just doing it off the cuff.
I think about one of my more difficult feedback situations is somebody I can relate to personally, because they get naturally really defensive. And no matter how I make it about, the team objectives or the this is about getting better or any of that, they have just a strong reflex, and so they don't like it. They don't want to be defensive. And so I think the thing that I've found that helps the most with that is really making sure that I follow up on the feedback and the successful outcome, and giving them credit for taking the course correction and making it better, and saying, this was tied to that feedback I gave you, and look, and you did this, not me, right? You made it better.
Patrick, are you hiring? I'm gonna work for you.
One thing I was going to bring up is, the channel is still relatively new in regards to what the success metrics were. So I've had to really focus on building out what that framework, that's what I call it, basically the activity framework of what success looks like, and then tailor it to the responsibilities of now, granted it is channel and a lot of them are similar, but the persona of each of the folks that are on my team are a little bit different based on what drives their customers. So system integrators are different than resellers, and distribution is different than resellers and so forth, but yet the same kind of KPIs are all in place when it comes to the overall pillars of what those activities should be. So marketing, executive alignment, demand gen, and therefore I have a template or a PowerPoint of like per quarter what they should be doing, and then how that should then be translated into what they provide in Salesforce, and then being able to just relate to the data. So that's really what I like a large portion of my in order to be able to keep the emotion out. It's funny based on the question that I asked, but it was really a leading question. That's why I did it. In order to really hone in and then be like, where do you think things could be improved, and allow them to be able to speak to it, knowing that this is what success is. That seems to be working.
Also, I would like to point out, in terms of giving positive feedback or praise, I learned it the hard way that not everybody appreciates public gratitude, because that's something coming in. I was like, oh, yeah, of course. Like there's the thanks channel, there's a discretionary bonus, and you would appreciate, but I learned it the hard way that not all personalities or styles appreciate that. So even when I give positive feedback, I have to make sure I'm like tailoring to or customizing to their own individual needs, which was really interesting for me to learn.
I kind of backed into an idea for that, which is I added to my one-on-ones because we weren't doing a good enough job of recognizing our accomplishments along the way because we're always so focused on planning and what we're going to solve in the future. And so I added a weekly, just what are we most proud of this last week in our one-on-ones? And then on an individual basis, I can bubble that up. And so I'm forcing them to think about their accomplishments and be a little self-promoting. And then we gradually expand their comfort zone to being more comfortable promoting themselves publicly.
That's a great point, Patrick. Yeah. I started doing something called brag sheet, where, it's just between me and the ICs, where we talk about accomplishments, and then I do like the idea of sharing it publicly and recognizing. So most people in my team do appreciate that. However, there are two individuals who don't. So again, I took that brag sheet approach similar to yours. That kind of worked.
Yep. And I could see culturally, certain cultures, that individual recognition is not as valued and makes it's almost negative. I can think of I think Denmark's one of them. And I don't have anybody on my team from there, but if I recognize that, I might think about making it more of a group accomplishment or something like that. But always pushing the envelope of comfort to get people to step out and be a little more self-promoting. And I sort of coach them that that's just going to be a good skill for their career.
Yeah.
I
Awesome.
love that one of the
Awesome
things that's come out here is that feedback, performance management isn't just about those cases where it's low performance. A critical, if not more important piece is that performance management for all the good things that our teams are doing, right? Helping them continue to play to their strengths. And as we talked about during the last session of the Drexler-Sibbitt model of providing that feedback to reinforce the positives to help get from stage 4 to 5 to 6, right? For peak performance.